Oh, I didn't want to be back for this one. No, I didn't want to be back because contrary to popular belief, I don't dislike Game of Thrones. I'm just disappointed. You know, when a father sees his son grow up to be an addict, it's not anger, it's just disappointment, because I knew there could have been something, man. And now they're dead. It's such a shame that this happened to Game of Thrones. So let's start with positives. I've been doing too much negative at the moment. Sometimes we've got to appreciate what is good about things. So let's start off here on a big positive note, and then anyone who doesn't want to hear criticisms can leave. As per usual, the cinematography is great. God, it's good. The set design is fantastic. Costume design is fantastic. The extras all do a fantastic job. I never saw an extra that I didn't like on Game of Thrones set. It's no Sharknado 2, there are no children running in front of a crowd, but they're having so much fun that they can't hide it. So in a scene that's supposed to be serious, there's a child laughing. No, there's none of that shit. This is proper professional stuff. What else? Dany's wig, fantastic as ever. I know it must take the stylists hours and hours. And apparently it does. It takes like an hour and a half to get the fucking wig on. So, you know, props to them. Imagine that being your job, putting Dany's wig on, putting that on your CV. I worked on Game of Thrones. Oh yeah, what did you do? I put Dany's wig on for an hour each day. That would have been something, eh? Yep, Dany's wig looked fine, quite realistic. I haven't noticed it that much, so props to them for that. There's lots more positive things, I'm just freezing up. The editing was really good this episode. It was a bit... We'll get to that later. There were some moments that weren't quite right, but on the whole, there was some good editing. And there's some stuff where it's showing the Hound getting beaten down, and there's Arya getting beaten down, and because the characters kind of share a connection, it flips back and forth between the two. You know, one gets beaten down, the other gets beaten down at the same time in the same manner. That was some good stuff, some quite inspired editing, and I like that. There were some nice moments in the episode, despite the fact it didn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, Arya coming to a family and saying, "Hey, I'll help you," and they get incinerated instantly. Despite it not making any sense, it looked nice. And it got some emotion out of me. The moment with the horse was nice. We're gonna forget that there being a random horse conveniently next to Arya, the only other person alive in the entire kingdom, is so contrived. But no, it was a nice shot. I'll give it to them. It looked nice. And it was appropriately paced after the action that came before it to have this nice slow moment to end the episode where they just kind of appreciate the chaos that happened. I like that. The location scouts, I'm just giving it to everyone. The people responsible for lighting, they did fantastic. The location scouts, they did a good job finding an appropriate King's Landing. The makeup artists, they did a good job. What I'm saying is that all the cinematic aspects are really good, as you'd expect from a multi-million-dollar production. It's just sad that it's in the service of this writing. The directing was on point. The guy on the horse, who looked like he would be an imposing villain in front of the gates when they were about to start the attack, and then Daenerys swoops in and kills everyone, despite the fact that, well, we'll talk about that later, but just presume that everything works as intended, and that's completely logical. That attack from behind that ends up killing them, it turns this imposing villain into a coward as he then tries to run away from the army. There's a nice cinematic approach to it, where it has him on the horse, so it elevates him as a villain, it makes him an imposing threat, and then it reverses it by putting him low to the ground and giving him a camera angle that is low compared to the characters that are about to kill him, showing how the power dynamic has changed and he has become weak and feeble. So on the directing side, it's good. There were some nice callback moments, the dragon roasting everything, and there being little spurts of the Mad King still left in there. You know that dragon fire thing? Yeah, there's a bit of dragon fire still left around the city, as referenced in the original Game of Thrones. It's showing a parallel between her and the Mad King. And that was nice thematically. But why do I feel empty? Why don't I care? Because I can't even muster the passion to be angry at the show. I just don't care. This is the conclusion of a culmination of characters and storylines that have worked for, I don't know, 12 years now. And this is how it ends up, and people are dying. It's just, I just nod. So first of all, I'd like to talk about, this concept of delayed gratification. If you don't know what delayed gratification is, it's basically, it's holding off on doing things so that later on it has more of an impact. Right? That's basically delayed gratification. Game of Thrones Season 1 is a classic example of this. Joffrey Baratheon. He becomes king. He spoiler alert for the show that you're on the 8th season for, so I don't fucking care if it's a spoiler. Sean Bean dies. I suppose that's not a spoiler to anyone because Sean Bean dies in just about everything. But Sean Bean dies by beheading because of Joffrey being a cunt. And my first impulse was, kill the little bastard. I do not want to see him as the king. But I had to wait years for that blonde little bitch to die. It took till Season 4, Episode 2 for him to finally kick it. I had to wait 4 seasons for that. But that made it all the sweeter. The thing that was so great about it was that it took its time, and it introduced more elements. It really built on Joffrey and just made him more and more of a despicable cunt in a good way because he had motives and there was appropriate setup and payoff. But it built on it and built on it and built on it, and then finally reached a point and said, okay, he's dead. And I went, oh, okay. And that was what was so great, was the restraint that the writers showed. It was that not giving the audience what they wanted. To hold back. To not give the happy ending immediately. The happy ending had to be earned after 4 seasons. After the Red Wedding, I sat in a dark room, listened to Linkin Park and cried myself into oblivion. I wanted so bad for Walder Frey to die, and he didn't. He got away with it. Oberyn getting his head crushed. Oh my god. I left the room and just in shock. And if Oberyn saw what would happen in the next season with his plotline, he would have wished that he could have died sooner. He would have wished for the death of his whole family to the mountain if he could see what would happen in Dawn in the next season. The point is that I'm trying to get across is that Game of Thrones took its time. And it appropriately set up moments so that when it reached that moment, it was so gratifying. It never felt forced. It never felt like the writers were just doing it to please people. They weren't doing it to please people. It was done because it was appropriate for that to happen in the moment. Like Tyrion's speech, the greatest thing to have come out of the entire series. I believe that was Season 4, Episode 7, where Tyrion gets up and says, fuck y'all for hating on me. And the reason it was great wasn't because it just came out of nowhere. It was because it was a culmination of everything. he was appropriately set up to be this kind of downtrodden figure, Tyrion. He was constantly chastised for being a dwarf. His father wouldn't accept him because he was a monster, quote unquote. He's had to live his entire life with people judging him for being a dwarf, so that speech was so powerful. But it was because of delayed gratification. It was because there was time given to these moments to allow them to build up and just build up and build up and build up and then shine. These past few seasons have abandoned that mantra entirely. Delayed gratification, we're just gonna do the mainstream stuff. But this season really has been the worst example of it. In 5 episodes, the White Walkers were killed. All of them. Not just one, all of them. Cersei was killed. Daenerys is going to be killed, presumably. That happens in 6 episodes. And none of it feels earned, because it wasn't... None of these individual components, like the Night King, or Cersei, or Daenerys, were given time to shine, because they've put crunch time on, and they've forced it into 6 episodes. It feels so rushed. Daenerys turning into the Mad King. I did see that was where they were going. There were hints dropped, even in the original series, that it would probably go that way. I think there was a reference in one of the very earliest episodes where they mentioned the coin toss to see if a Targaryen was mad or not. So I could see that was probably where they were going, but it got there so fast. I mean, Game of Thrones was known for building things up. Like, for example, Jaime getting back to King's Landing, that was an entire journey in itself. They didn't teleport to it like they do in later seasons. There was an entire journey between Brienne of Tarth and Jaime to get there. It took a long time, and it was a culmination of so many elements. And this Daenerys thing, they skipped straight to the end of the journey without the journey. And you know what they say about that? It's not about the destination, it's about the journey. There was no journey for Daenerys to become the Mad Queen. Not really. Emilia Clarke played it as best as she could to twitch her face like she's got Parkinson's disorder and go... But she does a really good job of portraying all of the different emotions that must be going through her head. It's just a shame that it doesn't fit her character at all, and it's not appropriate or well thought out, and it wasn't set up or paid off. It just happened in an episode. 2 episodes, actually. So last episode, maybe the episode before that, it set the seeds for Daenerys becoming the Mad King. But that's a big concept, and that's a big swap for a character, for someone who was morally righteous, who spent like 5 seasons doing the most boring trash imaginable, saving people from Slaver's Bay or whatever the fuck she was doing. No one wanted to see that, but she spent all that time dawdling about because she was being a good leader. And for her to suddenly switch to this mad person, there had to be more time dedicated to this journey for it to feel earned. But there wasn't. There had to be more time for Jaime's swap back to loving Cersei for it to feel earned, because I do think that Jaime returning to his sister was appropriate. I just don't think it was handled well, because he just suddenly flips the switch and he's like, oh, I'm back to loving Cersei, and there was no journey. Jon Snow has a very small journey where he loves Daenerys one second, then he sees war is evil, and he suddenly becomes some fucking hippie on a 70s college campus, smoking weed and saying, fuck war, man, we gotta end it all, man. love the trees, that kind of shit. And that was one episode. This is a journey in one episode. One episode is not enough time for character changes that are this big. Certainly not for Daenerys, but for her to change to something so dramatically opposed to what she was, there had to be more time. So why wasn't there more time? And I'm thankful for that, because seeing how it's ending up, if they'd done another season of Game of Thrones, I would have necked myself. But why didn't they do another series? George said in an interview that he would be happy for them to do 11, 13 series. I mean, there was enough content, even in the last book he wrote, for another couple of series, perhaps, with Tyrion, which would have been far better than the journey he ended up going on. And they didn't do it. They just kind of crushed it into this small, compacted thing. Tyrion instantly meets Daenerys sometime during season 5, I believe, and becomes the Hand of the Queen. That's not delayed gratification. That's instant gratification for you, where it happens so fast. It's like, oh, that didn't feel earned. They crushed it in and compacted it and made it like a few series instead of 11 or 13 series. And they made the last series, season 8, into 6 episodes. And the vibes I'm getting from these last 6 episodes, from the writing, from the mistakes that are being made, is that it's been rushed. I mean, the coffee cup, the biggest meme in the world. You're serious, right? An entire production crew, an entire cast filled with hundreds of extras, working hundreds and hundreds of hours. An entire editing room who stares at their monitor for 50 years at a time until their eyes go cross-eyed and they're like, oh, I can't stand to listen to my own voice. Oh, maybe that's just me. But, they just... And no one spotted the coffee cup. Not even the director. No one took it out. Or there was a shot in this episode where Jon Snow saves a woman from being raped and then tells her to get out of here. But it's so awkwardly shot and edited. I mean, he says it, and then there's some footstep sounds to imply that the woman's gotten up and walked away. But the extra doesn't walk by the camera to show that there's any movement from her on the ground, and the sound of her footsteps is so muted to the sound of the battle that it just looks like they didn't end the scene soon enough, and Jon's just standing there looking around like, oh. Is that a cut? I mean, it was so awkward. And no one in the editing room saw that? No one saw that. It says to me that there wasn't as much time dedicated to the process of production, particularly editing, that there was to the other series, because I don't believe there were any other of these issues in the other series. So it just feels a bit rushed. And the way they've just instantly concluded character arcs and big events, like having the Night King die like that, Jesus Christ. To just have it end in one episode. But it wasn't given enough time to breathe, and it was just instantly solved. And that says to me that the writers were rushed to conclude the series, even if it meant, concluding it in an unsatisfying way, or a way that didn't make sense. They still needed to conclude it. But as I've said, George wasn't the one who imposed these restrictions on him. Now, I can't pretend to know the behind the scenes, but I imagine, HBO wouldn't have minded another season. It's one of the highest grossing shows of all time. I don't have the statistics to back that up, but look at its popularity, man. It's mainstream. It's hitting the big time. Can't go into a single room without someone saying, "Oh, did you see Jon Snow? You think he's gonna make love with the Night King?" mentioned so often to me in every room. Trust me. So I don't think it's HBO responsible for creating this rush job. I think it's probably the people who are making the show currently. The producers, who happen to be the writers, I believe. David Benioff and the other guy. D&D. I think they probably wanted this series to be done. That is the kind of vibe I get a little bit. I mean, they've got a Star Wars series to get onto, right? And so they've got to finish this. It feels very much like that to me. Who knows? I could be wrong, but it feels like a rush job because someone didn't want to create the show for much longer. So they just had to find a way to end things even when they deserved more time to end. And so the last series has just been so unsatisfying. Every single one of the characters' story arcs has been unsatisfying, to say the least. The Hounds, Arya's, Cersei's, oh god, Jaime's, Euron's, oh my god, Tyrion's. There's not a single plot line that just that feels earned. Everything is rushed. Things happen too quickly. They're not given enough time to build up. So when there's the climax and when the thing happens, it just feels unearned, really. And that's probably the big problem, is it being rushed and it being about instant gratification so that they can finish the series. There were other problems as well. I'm going to get into them. A problem stemming from this rush job is I feel like the writers created an ending and they needed to get to that, but none of the pieces were in place. I feel like they had an ending in mind and they needed to reach this by the end of episode 6. They said to themselves, okay, we've got 6 episodes to get to here. And then to do that, they have to bungle all the characters and everything, every plot line they have to destroy. All the characters they have to destroy to reach that point. Each of the characters are doing things now to serve the plot, which doesn't serve the consistency of their character. Shall we look at the least consistent character in the entirety of Game of Thrones, Arya Stark? Her entire first 4 seasons, she goes through an arc where she desperately wants to get back to her family, and they keep dying. Through these traumatic events, she builds up a motivation. She builds up an archetype and a sense of character. She builds up a revenge subplot. Right? That's her character. She's a revenge archetype. She sees all of her family die and she wants to avenge them. It's a classic. And so her main thing, right, would be killing Cersei, the person responsible for the destruction of her family. That is the completion of the revenge plot, so to speak. That is her highest goal. That is her motivation. That's why she's doing the things she's doing. But then season 8, episode 2, they straight out say, no, that's not her motivation anymore. And when the Hound says, oh, you still got me on your list. And she says like, no, I don't really do lists anymore. What? But that's her character, man. What did she went through all of that for the list. That was her motivation the entire time, and you're saying that doesn't matter? You're completely betraying her character and what she is, what she was, and what she's doing everything for. So what is she now? If not for the revenge thing, and then just to kick them while they're down, she just fucking kills the Night King. It's like, what? Where'd that come from? There was no appropriate setting up of that. She had no motivation to kill the Night King. The Night King never wronged her. It wasn't a part of her revenge archetype. It wasn't a part of her plotline. It wasn't a part of her character arc. It served nothing. It was not in her character to kill the Night King. And she kills the Night King. Despite the fact that, you know, Jon would have been better for it. But we've talked about Jon and how he really should have been the one to kill the Night King, but he wasn't. Which completely betrayed his character and didn't fulfill Chekhov's gun principle, yada yada yada. And then, when it looks like, you know, they're returning to her archetype and Arya Stark is going to kill Queen Cersei, she goes to the tower and the Hound says, "No, my lady, turn around or you'll be killed." And she does? What? You are joking me. She is no longer Arya Stark. This is not Arya. I don't know who this imposter is. Oh, maybe what happened was that when she came back from the faceless thing, it wasn't actually her. We've been duped. One of those faceless men actually came back dressed as Arya. Huh? Better writing than the show, mind you. I don't think these people would do anything remotely clever like that. She's changed so much in such a bad way. None of it's earned. It just feels like she's not a character anymore. She's a mere means of making the plot happen. And such a fucking shame. You know the reason that the show was held together? Because Game of Thrones was driven by the decisions of men and women. You get the saying, right? The entire reason that this plot existed was because Littlefinger set up Sean Bean and his wife to investigate something which would start their war with the Lannisters. The entire reason that this plot existed was because Cersei and Jaime, they're really just like incest porn. I mean, that's their thing, and I don't mean to judge, but I judge a little bit, as does the rest of the kingdom. It was their decision. It was their motives is what created the plot, their decisions, what they do, what they say, how they act. That is what moves the plot forwards. The most classic example here is Sean Bean learning about the incest porn and saying, "Oh god, that's a bit weird," and then going to confront Cersei about it. And they later ask him and he says it's because he was an honorable man. And it's true to his character. Is it stupid? Yes. But it was because he was honorable and he had this code, Sean Bean, that he stuck to no matter what. He was such an upright, moral character that he tried to spare Cersei her life. If he'd betrayed his character like the writers would do now, Sean Bean would have just killed Joffrey in his sleep and Game of Thrones would have ended right there. That would have been the series over. No more conflict, no more plot. It just would have ended. But it was because the characters were so consistent, their motives were so consistent, their ideologies, everything about them was so consistent that Game of Thrones happened. It was because of Sean Bean's motivations that the plot happened as it happened. Every character's consistency is what made Game of Thrones happen. So you see then, when I'm saying that betraying someone's motivations and the fundamentals of their character is a bad fucking idea for a show called Game of Thrones, because that was what made Game of Thrones happen. That was what made Game of Thrones great, was that consistency. And they betray it for this shitty Hollywood plot that's so despicable and ugh. So let's look then at how the writers have betrayed the consistency and the motives of characters and completely changed their character for the plot instead of the motivations driving the plot. We've talked about Tyrion ad nauseum. Again, he made the dumbest fucking decision in this episode where he confesses to the queen that he told the spider Varys about Varys knowing about the king, and then he dies for it. He's so dumb now. He's so dumb, which is a betrayal of his intelligence as a character. Alright, should we look at Let's look at Brienne of Tarth again. I made a slight mistake in the last episode that I made by saying that Brienne of Tarth had a platonic interest in Jaime Lannister. It was shown in Season 4, Episode 2, that she did have love for Jaime. And there was a bond growing between them for a little while. So I can see that that would be in the books for their character. That does not excuse, in the slightest, Brienne of Tarth's change from this strong, independent woman to this love-struck puppy that sits around the house waiting for Jaime to come back, making her a slave to this deplorable man. Oh no, I love you, Jaime. Please, I'm so weak without you. Jaime Lannister. Here's a classic for you. Jaime motherfucking Lannister getting caught at the border. In the last episode, Season 8, Episode 4, Jaime tries to get back to Cersei, but then in Season 8, Episode 5, he gets caught at the gates and captured by Daenerys and her people. And she puts him in jail. So Tyrion goes to see Jaime, and he asks Jaime, how on earth could you do that? How could you get caught? And Jaime confesses it's because he had his golden hand on when he was trying to cross the border, which would immediately make him look like Jaime fucking Lannister. And so Tyrion, the dumbest guy on the show, asks, why did you show golden hand to them? And Jaime, I shit you not, says, Cersei always said I was the dumbest Lannister. There is so much wrong with that. Where do I begin? Let me massage my temples for a little bit. Does anyone remember Season 2 of Game of Thrones where Jaime was captured and he was locked up for a little while? He made an escape plan, and you know what this escape plan was? So, someone was put in his pen with him where he was jailed. They were also jailed. So, to escape, Jaime Lannister strangled this poor kid, which caught the attention of the person who was guarding Jaime. This person, this guardsman, comes in to see the situation. Jaime beats his head in, the guardsman's head in, takes his keys, unlocks himself, and escapes. That's a smart-ish plan. I mean, it shouldn't have worked, because, you know, there was still an entire camp to get through without any of the Starks noticing him, but they should have noticed him. But, you know, besides the illogical consistency of that, it was a somewhat smart plan of how to escape. And to say that he now is so dumb that he gets caught at the border with his golden hand. Are you joking? No, they're not. They're completely serious. This is from the writers who made the excuse that last episode Daenerys' dragon got killed by the ships because she forgot that the ships were there. The writing, you can see, right, how they've betrayed the intelligence and integrity of Jaime Lannister to make something happen, to make this moment happen between Tyrion and Jaime, which shouldn't have happened if the character was slightly smarter. If he was anything more than a moron, which he was, because in the other seasons he actually had some wit, and they made him dumb so the plot could happen, completely betraying their characters. So why should I give a shit about their characters when they're not actually characters? They're just plot drivers. They have no consistency. 1 second is Jaime Lannister, the other second is fuck knows who. This isn't the Jaime I knew. This isn't the Tyrion I knew. This isn't the Arya I knew. This isn't Daenerys. This is not Daenerys. They are a far cry. They're not even a far cry. They're not them, okay? They're just not them. They're completely different people. I suppose that's why there's no stress, and I don't care if they die, because the people I see dying, they aren't the characters that I grew up with. They're just some people invented by the writers to make a plot happen. Varys, the person who escapes danger, the person who sees 3 feet ahead of everyone. The person who's ruling the kingdom with his watchful eye cannot see his own execution and dies in the stupidest way possible. He dies in a way that's reserved for common criminal. This is not Varys. Who's this guy? Jon Snow and Tyrion just standing around, not saying anything as Varys is burned to ash. Not even a monologue to explain their thoughts, which I'll get into later about the monologues. Nothing from either of the characters. They just watch. And it was uncanny. It was very strange to just see these husks of characters standing around performing a ritual to make a satanic plot happen that was never meant to happen. Daenerys changing to the Mad Queen in like an episode or two. Foreshadowing is not enough. It's not enough. Up until this point, she had certain morals and codes that she upheld, which she betrayed entirely to reach the crown. And I would understand that if we saw some kind of character transformation, but they didn't give enough time to that because they were busy trying to conclude other plot lines in other places. So we end up with like 10 minutes of Daenerys and becoming the Mad Queen. That's not enough time to establish her as a different character who's morally opposed to who they were. She's just a different person now. Seeing her attack the people, it was just like, oh, that's really odd. Is that Dany on the dragon? Who is this attractive woman? Was she in the rest of the show? Oh shit, no, that can't be Daenerys. Look, it's a man, it's a bird, it's a dragon. It's Daenerys. No, it's not. Her character was completely betrayed for this. Everyone's character was completely betrayed for this ending. The Hound overcoming his fear of fire and the fear of his brother by killing him. That was the only plotline where I kind of said, yeah, you know what, that makes sense. It didn't make sense that he approached Queen Cersei at all, or that he'd approached the castle at all when it was crumbling. This is the man who fled from the Battle of Blackwater in the means of self-preservation, and he's gonna go in and do something morally righteous? No, this is the man who spits on righteousness in the means of saving his own skin. I haven't seen enough of a transformation from the Hound to become this kind of guy. So he goes to fight the Mountain, and there's Frankenstein with him. Contrary to popular belief, Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the scientist who created the monster, for clarification. So Frankenstein, the person who turned the Mountain into Frankenstein's monster, he's there, and the Mountain sees the Hound, and he gets a hard on and is like, oh, I gotta attack him. And Frankenstein, who's been controlling him this entire time to do whatever he wants, says to the Mountain, no, protect your queen. And the Mountain just kills him to get to the Hound, which completely betrays the rules of his zombification. I thought he was a servile slave with nothing left of the Mountain. No motives, nothing. He was just a husk of what he was. Kind of like every other character in the show, really. And he throws the evil scientist Frankenstein down and kills him, showing that he has his own individual will, despite the fact that he has had no individual will up until this point. So they just throw logic out the window again, so the Mountain and the Hound can fight, I suppose. Cersei Lannister. Oh, boy. Cersei Lannister's change has been the most disheartening of all time. Does anyone remember the Battle of the Blackwater, where Cersei was up in the castle being protected, while everyone else was fighting Stannis and his army? And Sansa was there with her, and Cersei decided to have a discussion with Sansa, man to man, woman to woman, really. And she was talking about what would happen when Stannis would breach the walls, and how it would end, and how she'd probably be raped along with all the other girls. And Cersei even said, she'd spread her legs for Stannis if it meant, staying alive, but she didn't think that Stannis would fall for that trick. But she was willing to do it. She was very cold and callous and calculated about the whole thing. And she saw the impending doom and just kind of waved it off like, that's life. And then she goes to the throne room with one of her children and she's going to kill her child with essence of nightshade. And here she is in this episode, standing by the balcony the entire episode. And she's crying like a little bitch. She was not like that at the Battle of the Blackwater, which is a direct comparison considering it's the same fucking thing, really. It's a raid from an imposing kingdom in which they thought they were going to lose. And this is the exact same scenario, but she's queen now and she's crying like a little bitch. She was the one saying that they'd all get raped. She wasn't the one crying in the corner like, as she said, all the rest of the hens. I could go on about inconsistent characters the whole day. At this rate, I'm going to be here until the next episode, and then I'm going to need to get something out for that one. So I've got to stop while I still have time. So we've got characters that are inconsistent just to move the plot on. Okay. That's really harmful, but we'll move on. I'd like to address another problem that I found with the series now. So, I believe it was in Series 3, don't quote me on that, because I don't know which of the characters this came from, and I'm paraphrasing, but they said that there was good and evil on both sides. And there really was. Just recall the Battle of the Blackwater. There was Stannis. He had a seemingly righteous cause to take back the throne for himself, which was entirely deserved, because he was of the Baratheon line, and Joffrey was a cunt. So, he deserved the throne. But if he took the throne, that would mean characters that, I really liked, like Sansa, like Tyrion, would end up getting raped and killed. So there was good on the side of the Lannisters, and there was good on the side of Stannis, because he also had Onion Man. There was good on both sides. So when the conflict came, it was genuinely interesting to watch, because I was like, well, I don't know who I want to win. Should it be? No. And yes, characters from which the perspective of the story is told get precedence, so I cared more for Tyrion than I did for Onion Knight and for Stannis, but there was still that interaction of good and evil on both sides, which made for this really tense and interesting conflict that asks the audience to think and engage on a deeper level than just the superficial. And then we come to the last season, and this is the most empty conflict of any of the seasons, even Ramsay Bolton. So on the one hand, you have every single one of the good guys from the entire series, except for maybe Jaime, who's going to King's Landing to fuck his sister one last time. On the other side of the battle, we have all the evil characters, like the Mountain Zombie, Frankenstein, and Cersei. And and Euron. Sorry, can't forget about him. In fact, everyone in Queen's Landing from that point was pure evil. So when the conflict comes, it is a battle of good and evil. There isn't good and evil on both sides. It's just evil. You may count the townsfolk of King's Landing as the good people, but fuck them. Like, the main characters are the ones we as an audience have been watching and we're attached to. And there were no perspective main characters for the side of King's Landing. There were none. So it's hard to care about any of these people being eviscerated, because one side is evil and one side is clearly good. And then we arrive at the point where they try and prove, oh no, it's not a battle of good versus evil, by doing something that's completely out of character for Dany and having the good guys turn into the bad guys. That was out of nowhere. Inconsistent rules. So last episode, one of the the dragons in Season 8, Episode 4 was killed by one of these scorpion things. And I suppose they did that to build tension, you know, because, oh, a dragon can be felled really easily by one of these scorpion things, is establishing, you know, a tone. Oh shit, a dragon will not be enough to deal with this problem. The dragons are vulnerable. That is the whole vibe I got from the dragon dying last time, which was completely inconsistent as well. But then in this episode, they fired the scorpion things at her dragon. None of them hit, and she just kills them all. It's like, what? Whoa! Scorpions have been nerfed harder than patches and Hearthstone. Where'd that come from? But then what was the point of introducing this rule that dragons could be killed when the dragon just became invulnerable anyway? What was the point of that? Just a temporary moment of tension so that the soap opera audience would go, oh my god, will Danny lose the last fight? And then Danny just wins so easily? The rules were not observed, were they? Scorpions established to be dragon killers. Scorpions in the next episode established to be ineffective against dragons. Like, you can see, right, how that's a bit of a problem, because when you build your tension on a premise like scorpions being able to kill dragons, and then the scorpions stop working against dragons, any tension you derived beforehand just vanishes, right? You get that, don't you? And the consistency of rules is so important, because without them, as I've said in the previous episode, if you don't observe the rules, then anything's possible, and we could just start flying, just have Jon Snow fly if we wanted to, because like the rules such as gravity don't need to be observed in such an inconsistent, unrealistic show. So after all that, what do we have? We have a show with inconsistent rules and laws, terrible writing. It's turned into a story of good versus evil, which it was never meant to be. The story is incredibly rushed and ill thought out, and oftentimes the payoffs that they're setting up happen so fast and that they're cheap and they don't feel earned at all. And some of these payoffs come at the consistency of characters. They ruin some characters just for the plot to happen, which ruins the best elements of Game of Thrones. So now, really, Game of Thrones is just, I don't know. It's just a show. I talked about it becoming more mainstream, but dude, if this is what mainstream is, I'm wearing beanies for the rest of my life and smoking e-cigarettes with a beard and goatee, working as a barista for the rest of my life. I will not be mainstream ever again, because if it's anything like this, it's a horror. So this episode, to quote Apocalypse Now, how would I summarize it? The horror. Oh, the horror.